Today that they had their gender-affirming surgery at 16. And I know you in former comments mentioned this on your blog. At about 16, you're an adult who's mature and can make decisions. You're that at 16. I don't care what anybody says, even going so far as to say, 16 people, when you're 16, you should be married and could be pregnant or should be pregnant. So I'm curious if 16 is an adult in your view. Why does this bill have the minor defined as 18?
Mr. Walsh, recognized. Yeah, that's a hit piece you took from Media Matters, from something when I was a radio host.
Let's stop right there for now. That's right-wing commentator Matt Walsh, and he was in Tennessee to testify against a bill to provide gender-affirming care to minors. Instead of making his point, Walsh found himself confronted with some disgusting comments he's made about the sex lives of teenagers.
I was talking about the fact that people tended to marry young historically, and that's all that was about. How does that relate to this subject?
Now, let's be clear. What Walsh said had nothing to do with women way back in history. In fact, Walsh was complaining that too few 16-year-olds are getting pregnant, and that the politically correct left is, in his view, wasting young girls when they're at their most fertile. How do I know Matt said that? Because I have the tape.
Between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
Yeah.
Okay? That's biological. That's a fact, all right? I'm just stating facts. That's all I'm doing. But what happened recently, and this is the fourth fact, recently in the last 30 years or so, we decided that that's way too young to start a family.
Why?
And because now
divorce rates would probably go up, and once you're that young, you can't really make sure that you know.
No, girls are getting no.
Girls were getting married early, and marriages were lasting longer.
That's right. According to Matt, everyone got together and somehow decided it was bad for adults to marry and impregnate kids. I wonder why that might be. And Matt Walsh wasn't done. He went on to praise those adult-on-child marriages as a dying breed of people who just want to save traditional family values. Yuck.
That's a dying breed of people out there.
Yeah, and those were all people that got married very young. That's why
they're still alive.
Yeah, that's why you can have someone in their 70s who's celebrating their, 55th wedding anniversary because they got married when they were teenagers. So what I'm saying is that the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy, it's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society.
There you have it. The only problem with adults impregnating children is that they don't marry them first. And Matt's efforts to waddle his way out of his own gross comments didn't go so well in Tennessee, where lawmakers had a good old time making Matt Walsh look like the idiot he is.
Educational background or your healthcare education experience?
Mr. Walsh, you recognized. My experience in healthcare?
Your educational background. I'm just curious. You've testified as to a lot of your own research. So I'm curious for what purpose you do that and what background you have to qualifies you to speak to that.
Well, my background that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain and common sense, and I have a soul. And so, therefore, I think it's a really bad idea to chemically castrate children. That is my experience. Also, I did. Now, it's true. I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read.
It really isn't normal to try and brag about being able to read. But when you're working with the audiences Matt Walsh normally draws, that's actually a pretty impressive achievement. And yes, Matt Walsh may lack any medical or public health education, and as he said, he didn't even go to college, but he does have a soul, allegedly.
If you're going to come before a committee and make mischaracterizations and misrepresentations, it's fair game for us to ask you your educational background and your foundational knowledge for making such characterizations. That's my point. So I'm curious about you speaking to the development of the human brain by the age of 25. I seem to recall you advocating on behalf of firearm possession at the age of 18. Do you think that's appropriate?
Let's stay on the bill, please.
Now, it's fun to dunk on Matt Walsh all day, and as you can see, Tennessee's Democratic lawmakers did pretty much exactly that. But let's get back to that original concern. Matt Walsh's fear that all those unmarried 16-year-olds aren't bearing enough children for their grown-up husbands. As it turns out, Matt has a lot of thoughts about the sex lives of minors.
When I talk about this, sometimes people will accuse me of being opposed to sex ed in general. They say, well, it sounds like you don't want any kind of sex ed.
Oh, have you picked up on that? Yeah, that's actually exactly how I feel. You're exactly right. There should be zero sex ed in the schools. The idea that safe sex is better than abstinence, that's a doctrine. That's your personal view, not science. Doesn't belong in the schools. The idea that masturbation is healthy and natural, that's a doctrine, not science. Doesn't belong in the schools.
Now, if you're like me, you may be saying, hey, all that stuff does have scientific backing, and Matt Walsh is just making stuff up to feed his victimhood complex. But remember, Matt Walsh is qualified to discuss these issues because he learned to read. The fact that he doesn't seem to actually understand anything he reads, well, that's another story. Matt Walsh traffics in a kind of conservative alternate reality that really only makes sense to the far right. A few years ago, Walsh proposed raising the voting age to 30. He's called for women to leave the workforce and focus on serving their husbands at home. But the joke's on Matt. Most of those 16-year-old child brides weren't even employed in the first place. In less funny news, Walsh has also called for doctors who provide gender-affirming care to be sentenced to death. It's no coincidence that rhetoric like that is rising hand in hand with right-wing bomb threats against children's hospitals that MAGA morons have labeled grooming facilities.
Arrest the culprits, the hundreds and hundreds of them, if not thousands of them, and throw them in federal prison. Now, this can't be a matter of simple fines and financial penalties. I mean, that should be part of it. But the only real recourse here, the only semblance of justice would be prison sentences, very long ones. Now, if it were up to me, we'd go further than that. As far as I'm concerned, mutilating and castrating children should be legally considered a capital crime, and it should earn the prescribed penalty for such crimes. But if we can't have that, then prison will have to suffice.
What Walsh is doing skirts the legal line around advocating violence. In Walsh's ideal world, the state would use its power to jail doctors and anyone who disagrees with the far right. But there's just one problem. With all those pediatricians locked up, who's going to give checkups to all those pregnant child brides? Walsh and his far-right allies represent a dangerous authoritarian wave that seeks to make medicine, science, and thought itself subservient to their own extremist religious views. Unfortunately for people like Matt Walsh, the more Americans learn about their insanity, the less they want to vote for Republicans. Keep on testifying, buddy. If you made it to the end, thanks so much for watching. Please leave a like and consider subscribing. And leave a comment below so you can let me know what I should cover next.